I'm fine. Save me. This is a weekly podcast where we two men talk about open and honest discussions about a wide range of topics, including mental health, suicide prevention, business, self-help, and God, we're exposing our vulnerability to let you know that it's okay to not be okay. And now your host, Burl Stricker and Brian Goodwin.
This is I'm Fine, Save Me. It's on most of the podcast stuff. We just added it to Spotify, which is pretty cool. But on Apple and Google podcast. And I'm here today with Jesse Crosson. And if you guys don't know who he is, I found him through TikTok and just was really impressed by your story, man. It's just, if you don't mind, give me a little background, or give us a background about you and really what happened in your life that was so significant.
Sure. So just after my 18th birthday, completely out of my mind, strung out on drugs, I committed a robbery and a shooting, and I was arrested. And really, that's kind of where the story should have ended, right? You know, I messed my life up. Everything was over. I was sentenced to 32 years in prison, which was twice the high point of the sentencing guidelines. But I had amazing friends. I had amazing family. I had amazing people who believed in me. I ran into some strange kind of mentors and teachers along the way. And over the last 19 years, I managed to kind of put myself back together. I was able to go to college. I was able to get a journeyman's electrical license. I was able to become a mentor and a tutor to other prisoners. I did a lot. And then in August of last year, the governor granted me a conditional pardon. So he commuted the remaining part of my sentence, the last 10 years, or depending on how you do the math. I got out about 10 years early, kind of unexpectedly with an hour and a half's notice, and was able to jump right into life. And then got out, thought I was just going to have a really simple life and, you know, get a job and hang out with my girlfriend and her dog. And instead, she told me I should really do a TikTok video, or I should do some kind of video where I share my story. And within a week, I had 10,000 followers, and then this thing built up. And now, you know, I've been on national television. I've testified in front of the General Assembly in Virginia about criminal justice reform. Yeah, I've just had this amazing opportunity to kind of share my story and speak out about things.
Yeah, a couple of questions. So why did the governor, is it the word commute? Is that what he did? Why did he do that?
So in the official pardon paperwork, it says because Jesse Crosson was barely 18 at the time of his crimes, and there's really no significant difference between someone who's 10 days short of his 18th birthday or 10 days after his 18th birthday as far as capability or maturity. Right. Because of the fact that I was sentenced to twice the high point of the sentencing guidelines, and because of the extraordinary work, those are his words, that I did while I was locked up to better myself and to be of service to others, he felt that I was deserving of a conditional pardon. That's
pretty amazing. Did that totally come out of the blue, or is that something that you thought might happen?
Well, so I had applied back in 2019. Okay. When I applied, I thought it was completely no go. I did it because, you know, I had a mentor who told me, we can't control the outcome of any situation, but our work is to do what we can and then let go of the results. And so that was my part. I felt like I had, 12 more or 13 more years left on my sentence. And I wanted to do everything I could to know that I had tried to get out or to change the way things were, but then to let go of this, the outcome, thinking that I was going to have to do that time. And instead, this kind of amazing, support, this build that I wasn't expecting at all. I got some media coverage. I had people reach out from the community. I had people reach out internationally. And people just kind of built the support. I had hundreds of letters of support. It was just this amazing development. So then in February of 2019, my mom got a call saying, hey, Jesse's paperwork has finally made it to the top of the desk. We're going to look at him. We're going to do an investigation. And we should know something by the end of the year.
Right.
And so I thought by the end of the year, I might hear something. But again, I was, my girlfriend was convinced I'd be getting out. I was not. And then, on August 16th at 2:00, they just called me into the office and told me I was leaving. And an hour and a half later, I was giving my mom a hug for the first time in a year and a half.
Yeah, when you told that story through video, I was pretty amazed by that story. It seemed like that had to be like overwhelming emotions. Just even when you're telling it on the video, I'm like happy for you. I'm excited. I'm like, this is cool. Everybody, of course, and you've done some videos on it, but of course, they want to know what happened originally that made you go to jail. So if you don't mind, tell us what happened there when you originally went to jail.
Sure. So there were two separate events. There was a robbery and then there was a shooting. The robbery was the guys I was with. We were strung out on drugs and we ran out of drugs and we couldn't borrow anymore. And we didn't have any money. We couldn't sell anything else. We kind of run down to the edge. So one of the guys had worked at a restaurant, and he said, "Oh, the people who own these restaurants, they're terrible people. They hire illegal immigrants, and they don't pay them. They give them $2 an hour, and they keep the cash. And if we go take something from them, it's not really like stealing because they're stealing it from somebody else." And we just built this whole justification in our mind to do this terrible thing. So we broke into the home. We thought it was empty, but there was someone there, so it became a robbery. And we didn't get anything. There was no money. This was either just in his mind, or we didn't find it, or I don't know. But it's just kind of a good example of how delusional and out of control we were. And then about a week later, I can't actually remember the timeline because there was not a lot of sleep or cognitive processing going on at the time. I got into an argument with two guys. They were at a buddy of mine's house where his pregnant girlfriend was, and they were saying he owed them money and they weren't going to leave until he paid them, and they had to get this and they wanted drugs, and it was just this bad situation all the way around because, again, of the choices that we had made to put ourselves in that situation. And I kind of tried to play the hero. I said, y'all are going to leave right now or else. And we started yelling at each other, and we made this agreement to meet. And so we went to go meet. And then I had this realization one of the few times during all that something kind of came through from the back of my mind. Like, this is a really bad idea. Like, I shouldn't be doing this. Like, somebody's going to get hurt. Like, what am I thinking? And so I left. Right. And they chased after me. And so as they were chasing after me, I was in the normal lane and they were in the passing lane driving down the road. And as they were side by side, kind of revving up with the car, the passenger reached back to grab something. And I don't know, to this day, what he was actually going to grab. But in my mind, he was grabbing a gun. So I pulled my gun out and opened fire, and I shot both of them. And they both lived. I did not. No, they were able to make it to a store where they were able to call EMS and go to the hospital. But I mean, it's nonetheless, one of the stories that I talk about is the grandmother of one of those men talking about hearing the news that her grandson had been shot and sharing that. And that at the day of sentencing broke me in a way that nothing previously had, because there was no abstract denial or justification or imagination. It was this very real human pain right in front of me that I couldn't run away from anymore. And that really did a lot to kind of break down whatever barriers I had left of refusing to accept responsibility or not knowing how to accept responsibility, because it didn't really leave me a choice.
When you're going through the court stuff and all that, and I've seen those kind of situations, obviously no extent to yours, but were you just feeling like your life is over with at 18 years old? And it just feels like there's no. How long did that process take from the whole court to sentencing to, how long did that process take?
So it's about 8 or 9 months to sentencing. And then, so I can't remember because I pled guilty. I can't remember how long all the spacing between them, but I think it was like 8 or 9 months. And then I went in front of sentencing, and that was when I got the time. And that was what kind of broke me. And it was funny because you ask about the, feeling like my life is over. It was never a linear thing. There was never just one direction. It was maybe I'm feeling a little bit more put together. Or I'm feeling like, okay, maybe I can figure out a way to do this. And then something would knock me back down, or I would come up with some excuse or start feeling sorry for myself again. And that was the big one. Like, I had started taking college classes while I was in the jail. I had started connecting with people. I had started trying to, change my sleep patterns and work out and, address things. And then when I got sentenced to 32 years, I just gave up. I said, even if I wanted to do better, why would I? How could I? Like, that's my whole life. That's, almost 2 times what I've lived already. And I have to do that in prison. And I was just full of self-pity and kind of self-hatred too, because I knew that I put myself there. So
how long did that time period last of just self-loathing, self-pity before something clicked in you and you started saying, I'm going to live instead of basically I'm going to give up?
I mean, again, it wasn't a linear thing. It was just kind of back and forth. I always say it's 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. So I'm making progress, but it's not always, as significant as it could be. When I first got to prison, there were some really difficult or ugly things that happened, but there was a sense of being able to have a life again. Because in the jail, you literally just sit around the jail block all day. You don't go anywhere. You don't do anything. You don't get to leave to eat. It was just sitting there all day. And it felt like I was being held kind of in stasis. When I got to prison, and it was like, okay, you get to go to the chow hall. You can apply for jobs. Like, you can go to school. You can, all of a sudden it felt like, okay, maybe there's some hope here. There's some way that I can move forward and I can do things. And then I had kind of like setbacks or just kind of like fallbacks over the years. But it was from that point that the growth really started being significant, and I really started making changes.
Is there you mentioned like mentors and you mentioned different things like that. I'm real curious about the mental health of it all, because when I think about, this, we have the worst prison system in the world. We imprison more people than anybody in the world. I live in Oklahoma, which we have the most amount of female prisoners in the world right here in the state. And the system's broke. It's like very clear to me it's broke. And so I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary. It's on like Netflix or something, but it's basically how to survive in prison. And that's what it talks. The point of it is that there's a very high likelihood that you could go to prison. And so when I look at the reform of it, and I see some of your videos talking about the reform of, all that, to me, it's like, how in the world you came out with as I'm watching you and listening to you, I'm like, man, you came out with purpose. And I know that didn't just happen, overnight, but I'm saying I see purpose. There's obviously crazy intelligence there. And I mean, now you're wanting to help other people too. Can you give me just a few of the things that really kind of changed your life or changed your mentality during that process?
Sure. I mean, one of the things was just a constant presence of love and support from family and friends. Yeah. It was, when I didn't believe in myself, they believed me. When I was broken and didn't know how to move forward, they were there letting me know that I would find a way. Even when I was down, like when I lost my dad, I remember my grandfather, the man I call my grandfather, who's actually my stepmother's father. We're not related by blood, but he is as much family as anyone I've ever met, because my dad died and he came up to see me and he said, there's nothing I can do about your dad dying, but I can tell you this, you may have lost him, but you're never going to lose me. And he has been in my life as the most amazing, caring, loving, guiding, teaching man I could have ever imagined. And it came out of nowhere. It just was, it's those series of kind of gestures and actions and just kind of constant presence by people has been the most significant thing, because there were so many times that I wanted to give up, or I could have gone to in a different direction, and I didn't because of them. Then, I did. I had some really significant mentors in prison. I remember when I first got to prison, my main focus was education. I thought I was going to educate myself out of this. Like if I could just get enough education, everything would be okay. But the problem was I was miserable. I mean, I was clinically depressed. I was barely functional outside of, kind of reading and doing the daily things that I was doing. And somebody said to me, he said, that education is great, but at some point you're going to have to start living and you're going to have to start making human connections, because life is about a lot more than books. And I was really defensive and I didn't want to hear that. And I said, well, you just say that because you don't read enough. And he was like, actually, I've got a PhD. Like, I can tell you this from experience. And he did. He had this amazing life experience that he shared with me that gave me a different perspective. And I realized I couldn't kind of dissociate myself. I couldn't stay in some ivory tower. I couldn't read my way out of this. I had to find a way to live, kind of the struggles and the questions that I was having. And then the third and the most significant piece for me was the introduction of meditation. I moved into the cell with this guy who was kind of like this homeless sage out of like some Chinese tale. It was bizarre. And he reintroduced me to martial arts, which I'd done as a kid. And he said, look, you need this as a regular practice or a daily practice. And I told him I was interested in meditation, and I started, and I've been doing it daily ever since. And I've since, when he got out, I found a Zen teacher on the street. I was able to connect. But it was the practice that allowed me to have space for all those things that had been so overwhelming before. Whereas every time I'd wanted to get high, or I'd been depressed, or I'd been angry, or I'd been whatever, I would lash out, or I would do something self-destructive, or I would give up. All of a sudden, I found space in myself to experience these things, to experience whatever was happening without it necessitating some kind of action, or especially some self-destructive action. And that was just transformational. I had never realized that was possible. And that sounds crazy to some people, but one of the things I've realized is that, especially with developmental trauma, or especially with certain experiences growing up, some things that people take as kind of obvious or clear or really simple are not for other people. And that was the thing that I even realized when I was mentoring other people. Some of these most basic things to me were just foreign to them, and they didn't have that concept. So I kind of had to start at the beginning and rebuild piece by piece by piece to move forward in a way that was actually sustainable.
Yeah. Again, at any point during this time period, did you ever contemplate suicide?
So even though I was meditating, even though I was doing service work, even though I was doing everything, I had gone through periods of sobriety and then periods of, thinking I could control using and drinking and, kind of a justification. And so I was in a really bad long distance relationship with this woman who, the best way I can describe it is all her, problems and all my problems came out to play, and it was really, really ugly. Right. And so I was in a really bad place, and then I was using and drinking to be able to sleep at night, to be able to get up in the morning. And so I was as strung out as I've ever been. I was at as low a spiritual bottom as I've ever been at. And I was in this terrible relationship, and I was sitting on the edge of my bed one day, and I realized that I was not going to make it through that day. Like, I didn't want to live. Literally, the pain of being there was worse than the pain that would have to be to take my own life. And that was when something shifted, because I just started crying, and I felt like this is, again, this complete failure, because if I've gotten to this point, there's no way I can keep going. And that was really the kind of shift that was, I guess it's kind of predicated on meditation, but it was a different thing. There was enough space for all of that. And I had had experiences of being able to notice my anger or notice my sadness and not be engulfed by them. But this was an experience of being completely and totally engulfed by just sadness and frustration and meaninglessness and hopelessness, but at the same time, somehow having space for that to be okay. Right. And that was the moment that I did. I broke up with her. That's my sobriety date. There were so many things that happened out of that moment.
Whenever you were dating her, is that right?
Say it again.
You were in prison when you were dating her.
Yes.
Okay. So, I'm just fascinated by, like, you have a guy like me. I've never been to prison, and I've been to jail, but I've never been to prison. And I think about, I hear your story, and I'm like, I find it inspiring because I've never been to prison, and I don't know how I'd overcome some of the things you're talking about. Like, first of all, you're talking about drugs, talking about going in at a very young age. We're talking about you had to have, just normal things going on in your brain. I mean, something made you start doing drugs, some kind of tragedy, some kind of crisis, some kind of something made you, your mentality of some sort made you do drugs, right? And then I think, how did you overcome those things? And I know you haven't 100% overcome every little thing, but still to hear that story. And I think that that's really interesting to people because you could almost make fun of a guy like me and be like, man, you've been out on, never been in prison. You could do whatever you wanted to do. But yet I look at you and your story, inspiration, and how you overcome these things. And I wonder, like, the meditation is something that a friend and I just talked about. And the fact, to me, it means like being present. And I struggle with that, being present, because I want to think about the past a lot. I want to think about the future. I want to have, but where I struggle is that being present right now in this moment, to me, that's what meditation is. I'm not an expert in it, but I think that whenever I think about meditation, it's like the time periods in my life, or if you look at it in another way and think prayer, that you have to push those things out that are not present is what it seems like to me. Would you agree with that? How would you describe that? The way you think about meditation and prayer and those things.
Sure. I mean, there are all these different kind of forms or practices of meditation. You have concentration and mindfulness. And I come from a Zen tradition originally, and I haven't practiced formally like that in years. But yeah, the practice that most resonated with me is something called shikantaza, which means literally just sitting. It is just sitting. It is not kind of going down any of these mental pathways. It's not going into the past. It's not going to the future. It's just sitting. And whatever comes up, whatever sound, whatever thought, whatever anxiety, whatever, just acknowledging it and experiencing it without judgment. Or if it's judged, then acknowledging that judgment. And the practice of meditation is, I guess this sounds strange, but the practice of meditation to me is not the point. The point is, like you said, to take that presence into daily life. To not just do it, 30 minutes a day on a pillow, but then the rest of our lives kind of go off and run willy-nilly. It's to take that presence and be able to be with it as I'm riding down the road, or as I'm in the middle of a discussion, or as I'm, feeling hungry and lonely, or whatever's happening, being present with whatever that experience is. Prayer, I'm not sure I could define prayer. That's an interesting one, because part of 12-step programs is a daily practice in prayer. And I was really resistant to that because of kind of the household I grew up in and some of the ideas that I had about God. I was really resistant to the idea of prayer. But what my mentor said that I'm so grateful for, he said, this has worked for me and nothing else has ever worked. And you're telling me you can't figure out how to do this on your own. So why don't you try it? If it works, then great. If it doesn't, then don't worry about it. And so I did. I started saying what's called the 3rd-step prayer every morning. And I didn't like the language and I didn't like whatever. But what I found, it has provided a consistent kind of anchor in my life to the present moment and to what's important, and to not getting caught in all these other things, and to not getting caught in self-will. And it's been just profoundly important. So whether prayer is aspirational, or it's self-talk, or it actually is, a relationship with a higher power, I found it to be very effective.
Did you do the 12-step program there in prison?
So
through the 12-step?
So the first prison at Nottoway that I was at, Powhatan and Nottoway didn't have 12-step programs. At Buckingham, they did. They had meetings, which I was really grateful for. And actually, when I got sober, the first person I ever got drunk with ended up being my sponsor, which I thought that was an interesting coincidence.
When you got drunk in prison, right? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, the first time I got drunk was on the street, when I was
I'm saying, but
younger.
You were able to get drunk in prison, is that right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you hear about that, but I guess it's all available.
Yeah, unfortunately, because you have a huge financial incentive for, kind of drug dealers or people who make their living that way, as well as for guards who are severely underpaid. If people are struggling to pay their family and somebody says, hey, I'll give you $1,000 a week to do this, some of them are going to say, yeah. And then you have drones. You have all kinds of different ways that it's going to get in, but there's this huge financial incentive, and it's going to continue to be until we address the issues of addiction, until we provide the support that actually helps people deal with their issues. And not everybody's going to take that support, so it's not going to deal with it completely, but to kind of put in people in an environment that is not therapeutic and that is understimulating in good ways and overstimulating in bad ways, and not really provide them the coping tools, well, addiction is going to continue to run rampant because it's what got them in there in the first place. And if there's no attempt to address it, well, it's probably going to continue to run their lives unless they reach a bottom like I did, where it was too much and I knew I had to do something differently.
Yeah. So you definitely think that the 12-step program was part of your healing and
oh, absolutely,
addiction and all those things. What other kind of mental health did they offer any other kind of mental health in prison?
So there's a mental health department at every prison, and there have been a couple bad apples or whatever you want to say, but for the most part, they are amazing, caring, driven, motivated, capable people. They're just tremendously understaffed. You have these very severely mentally ill prisoners who take up 90 or 95% of their time, and then there's not a lot of time left for the rest of the population. Now, there are some programs, they're very limited, but I was really fortunate. I mentioned finding a Zen teacher earlier, and he's a Gestalt therapist who's worked in all these different fields, and he was able to give me kind of clinical experience and to a certain degree clinical training on a lot of things. Someone else introduced me to dialectical behavioral therapy, which I'm a huge fan of, and I actually used to teach components of when I was a mentor. There's another thing called nonviolent communication, which focuses specifically on communication and our own emotions or feelings and needs. These models that I found were not taught by the prison, but are incredibly effective. And I think there is a move toward that, because I remember I was talking to a woman who was at a women's prison, and they said that they had started regularly teaching DBT. It's the best kind of general model that I've ever found. And I think there's a shift in that direction. It's not quite there yet.
So were these staff that were teaching you these techniques and you were doing these things, is that staff that worked there?
No, this was what I got from my relationship with the therapist outside. The staff, I was able to meet fairly regularly with mental health, especially when I became a mentor. So I had a volunteer role that was underneath of them, so I could kind of go between with issues and with what was going on. But most of the training, it was something either I did on my own or I did it with a relationship with someone on the outside.
Well, we can't go without telling the story about, I'm very curious about, you met your current girlfriend in prison. She was a reporter. She was doing a report or a news story on your story. Tell me how that worked out, because whenever I'm again, I haven't watched every single one of your videos, but it's pretty intriguing to hear about that relationship. Most people would think that could never happen. A guy in prison finding love and all these things. How did you guys meet, and how did that relationship flourish?
Sure. Yeah. So back in 2019, after I had put in my clemency petition, she was doing a report on the kind of status of criminal justice in Virginia almost 25 years after they had abolished parole. And so she wanted to see both sides. So she went to a local delegate who was very much in favor of the abolition of parole. And then she wanted to say, well, what about? And so I was the what about case. What about someone who was sentenced when he was young, who was sentenced to far more than the guidelines, and who's doing good work, like somebody who's actually turned their life around? And so I was highlighted in this 2-part series for a local news station. And then we stayed in touch as kind of reporter and source, because one of the problems with being in prison is there's no oversight. So when terrible things are happening, there's not really a lot you can do. So having a reporter who could raise that, say, hey, we've got a scabies outbreak and nobody's getting care, or hey, they're strip searching children coming into the visitation room without parental consent. Like, this is not okay. And she would broadcast it. It was amazing because it felt like we had a voice and a connection to the outside world. So then maybe 9 months after we started talking as kind of reporter or source, I called and I could just hear something in her voice, like something was going on. And I said, look, are you okay? And she had this shift, and she basically said, Jesse, I've got to tell you something, but if I tell you, I can't be your reporter anymore. Like, we're going to be friends, and then it's no longer appropriate for me to report on you. And I said, yeah, I don't care. Like, I want to know, are you okay? What's going on? And she told me about a personal crisis with somebody that she loves. And she was just having a really hard time, but we stayed in touch, and I actually ended up talking to that person that she loved. And then at that point, we became friends, and we would talk every couple of weeks or every month, or, we would stay in touch, but it wasn't this really intense thing. And then it happened. This was during the pandemic, when coronavirus had everybody scared and we were in prison and we were locked down. they shipped 64 of us from the prison I had been at to a new prison that was a dormitory. So I went from a single cell that had taken me 12 years to get into, and a great job and a volunteer position and all these things that were limited based on COVID, but still that were there, to being sent to a dormitory that was an open room with 82 men where there's no separation or social distancing. It was not a good situation. I was freaking out. And she was one of the people I called. And she just had the greatest advice. She said, you're in the middle of crisis, but crisis is full of stories. Your job is to write the story. So you write the experience as you see it, and you also get to shape the narrative. Like, how do you make the best of this? What are you going to do with this? And there was something in that was exactly what I needed at the moment. It changed where I was at. I mean, I still struggled with the shift. But at that point, we started talking a little bit more. And then it was in February when my mother got the call that my clemency petition was being looked at. She, within 12 hours, had another crisis with the person she loves in her life. And so I said, look, you're going through it. Let me call you. And, we'll talk for 5 minutes in the morning. You can cry, you can scream, whatever you need to do. And, we'll talk about it. And so I called the next day and we talked for 5 minutes. And then the next day it was 20 minutes. And the next day it was 40 minutes. And after a couple of weeks, we were talking for hours every day. And the initial part was kind of her grieving or her struggles or her emotional stuff. But then we began realizing how much we had in common, how interested we were in the same books, in the same music, in the same sports, in the same activities, there was something just incredibly compatible about us. And after a month, she just said, Jesse, I think we need to talk about this. I'm in love with you. And I still, even though I had felt that way, even though this thing had been building, I was still thinking, this is an incredibly intelligent, capable, successful woman out in the world. Even if we do have this connection, she wouldn't possibly feel this way about me. And she did. And it was a relief. It was really nice to hear that. Yeah. But I still have a lot of concerns about, I don't know if I'm getting out of prison. My clemency petition isn't for sure. I don't feel comfortable with her saying I want to be in a relationship with you, even though, you may not get out, because I don't think that's fair. And I didn't think that was okay. But we continued to talk and we had this really incredible relationship. And we decided, kind of like you said about meditation and presence, the only thing we could focus on was the experience we were having, the goodness or the satisfactory nature of what we had, right? That we were both very satisfied to be able to talk on the phone, and we couldn't live in the future in these dreams and these hopes. We had to be where we were and make the best of it. And then, on August 16th, she got the call. So I had an hour and a half's notice. She was actually in a business meeting and she had a half an hour's notice, but it was a 45-minute drive. So I got out, hugged my mom. We went out to the end of the driveway and Courtney was on her way, but we pulled over to the driveway right next to a cornfield. And then 15 minutes later, she drove up and I got to meet her for the first time in person in a cornfield in rural Virginia, which was really, really amazing.
I mean, I think it's a great love story. I really do. I
agree.
I think that, again, it goes back to, I'm really struggling to put it in exact words, but I can't tell you how inspirational all that is, because there's no recipe in all that where you should be the way you are, meaning that very insightful, helping people. I watched one of your videos where you talked about you read thousands of books, and I'm an avid reader, so I love to read books, and I can relate to that but there's two parts to that. There's an escapism. You can escape in those books, and that's all. And you kind of mentioned that a while ago. You're saying, the guy was saying, hey, it's something outside the books that you can actually learn. And but I think that it's inspirational because you can, in your situation, I don't think that the probability of you finding love seems very low to me. I'm saying in prison. I think the probability of you coming out mentally, at least in this good place, and you seem like very peaceful, and I feel like that you learn better coping techniques than probably most of the guys I know, honestly, man. And that to me is inspirational, because I look at that and I'm saying, what is my excuse, or what is some of my friends' excuses that that we're making excuses that we can't find these things, and we can't find maybe mental. One of the big things that I've been a huge advocate for is, I've had some major suicides in my family and friends in the last few years. And so that's one of the reasons I started this podcast. And so and it's, all these were men in my life, I know women commit suicide too, but I've been this huge advocate for it, because I see normally a guy that I've seen will commit suicide over in a time where he's drinking too much, in these cases that I'm talking about, and it has to do with a relationship. So you have this broken relationship, and then you add drinking on top of that, and then they kill themselves. And all that just amazes me, because it's in this situation, it's like they don't seem to have any hope outside of their situation. They don't seem to be able to look beyond their situation. Where I hear your story, and it's like, yes, you still struggle to look beyond you're 18 years old and you were looking at 32 years or whatever. I mean, that to me seems crazy hopeless. And somehow the inspiration, man, that you continue to bring out, I think, is that, man, there is hope. There's always hope. And I don't know. I appreciate it very much. That's amazing to me. I think that, what do you got going on right now? I mean, what are you doing? I know you got a job, and I know it has something to do with prison stuff and prison. Can you explain to me what you're doing now and what's kind of your direction now?
Sure. I'm doing a lot, and that's part of the problem. So I'm doing some prison advocacy work. I'm doing some consulting for that. But the problem is that doesn't pay, right? You don't get paid to, go to the General Assembly and testify in front of a subcommittee. You don't get paid to, go speak at a rally. You don't get paid to, talk to delegates and senators. So I have to do something to pay the bills. So I was going to go be an electrician. I got an electrician's license while I was inside. And then I had somebody, after the TikTok account started, say, hey, could you run my social media for me? Like, could you do that? Could you help me with some marketing? And I really thought it was a joke. It was like, where I've been the last 20 years. You want me to run your social media? Like, right. I'm literally the worst person.
I thought your girlfriend did all that. Really? Is that true? I thought your girlfriend did all that.
Oh, I wish. Yeah. But no. So yeah, I'm trying to kind of figure that out. And I've built up. I've got a couple clients that I consult for. But then it's every direction. Last night life is busy. Last night I was in a local organizing meeting where they're trying to bring criminal justice reform advocates with local resources, with local kind of support groups together to try to figure out what we can do to affect change in the local area, how we can best provide, services for reentry, services for victims of crime, services for all these different things. So there's a lot of networking. There's a lot of hoping to figure out a way to focus on that kind of bring together the resources that are already there and then provide the ones that aren't. So there's meaningful access for the community. I just submitted a book proposal, and hopefully that'll be something that I can do to make a little bit of money. I've been doing TV appearances and podcasts and all that. It's just been kind of a whirlwind that was not what I was expecting. If you had asked me 6 months ago.
It's pretty exciting. Something comes to mind when you're talking about that. You have to I know, looking through your comments and all that stuff, or people commenting on your videos, I see a lot of positive. I mean, amazing. I mean, I always say it's like 90% positive. People are saying good stuff, but then you do have these haters. And in my opinion, you have to, I've had a few videos go viral, and it's like, you almost have to have the haters if you want to go viral. If you want to go big, you have to have those people. But how have you dealt with that? Like, even maybe some of the victims of the crime they committed, has any of that crept back up? And have you had how are you dealing with those kind of situations with the hate and that come around? I know it does for you with that many followers.
Sure. I mean, it comes around. I think one of my problems is I feel like it's my responsibility to represent this and change people's minds, which is completely unfair and narcissistic and unrealistic. But if I say something about change and someone's response is really negative, or I say something about accountability, or I say something about hope or second chances, and their response is really negative, well, I want to understand why they're saying that. So I want to understand where it's coming from. And a lot of times I'll ask questions. I'll say, hey, do you genuinely believe that everyone who commits a non-capital crime should be sentenced to a life sentence? And people's response will often be like, well, but you shot people. You're a bad person. It's like, okay, I hear you saying that. I hear you feeling that. Sometimes I kind of draw upon nonviolent communication, which is a method of communicating and trying to find out what's underneath the communication or what's underneath the words. But the problem is some people don't want to look at what they're saying, don't want to look at what they're doing, don't want to look at what's going on. And the more energy I invest in that, if they're not willing or able to do that, the more I'm just kind of wasting my own time and I'm getting myself caught up in a bind. And that's a problem that I have. But for the most part, the only comments that bother me are the ones that are like partially true.
Right.
When somebody says something and I go, man, that really hits a nerve. Like that hits some insecurity in me. Like somebody says I'm really selfish. Well, like I've been really selfish in my life. And at times I do act really selfishly. That bothers me because I feel like he's on to something. Like I need to look at that. And as best as I can, I try to acknowledge what's real and what's not. And the really hyperbolic, like crazy comments are the easiest to dismiss because they're just crazy. But yeah, when somebody says something like that, it can be really difficult for me. And so I try to listen the best that I can. I'm trying less and less to try to change everybody's mind and say, you know what? I can live by example. I can do the best that I can. And the rest is not up to me. Whether people believe or don't believe or agree or disagree really isn't my place to choose anyways. So I'm trying to learn and mature in that area, because I do still want to kind of go in and fix everything. And I do want to, try to figure out what's going on, that somebody is so hurt or so angry that they respond in such a negative way. And if there's anything I can do to try to like ease that transition, I would like to do that.
Yeah, I saw where you had posted a video. I guess you put out a video. It was kind of you responding to someone, and then you deleted it because you felt like your response was not the right response. And so, and I get those. I've done those things too. I think you writing a book, I do think I would love to read it. I think that you have a lot of, I want to know more, and when you can't fit it into a 30, 45-minute podcast, but I want to learn more about your coping techniques and how things that you did just to, at different times when you look, because you talk about food, I remember one of the videos that I love, it's probably my favorite, is because I love the outdoors, you were talking about how one time y'all got to work outside and sing the stars and sing all those things. And I'm like, I had never thought that, to me, like I love seeing sunsets and sunrises. And I love, I even have apps for the stars just to look at it and just the beauty of it. And so to hear from you that like really in this 19 years or whatever, you didn't really get to see those things. And man, and I think that like, that's stuff we miss, and when you're out here, the beauty of like what is going on around us, sunsets, because I live in an area where sunsets and sunrises are just amazing, but I miss them. I miss them all the time. I miss those stars all the time. And I think we take those things for granted. And I think that, part of that, if I was able to read more about, kind of what your thoughts and all that are, I think it would be great. I'd love to read a book I hope that works out for you. So I know, just to kind of wrap up, people can connect to you on TikTok, of course, Jesse Crosson. Where else can they connect to you if not TikTok?
The majority of stuff, as far as like articles and appearances and writings and things like that, are on my Linktree, which I haven't figured out how to give a simple thing. But if you go to second-chancer.com, that should link to the Linktree or link to something else. I'm not very tech savvy. I'm not really sure what I'm doing. So I'm trying to put this together little by little. But that should have all my contact information and social media stuff and be a way to connect.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would like to say before I let you go? Or is anything you'd like to add that I didn't ask? Or
basically there are two things that are really important as a message that I try to share. One is that the way we're doing things is broken for a lot of reasons. It's not just broken because of poor prisoners and how badly they're treated. We have a system that focuses on punishment of the perpetrator of a crime, which means that there isn't, support or focus or attention on the victim of a crime, which is really unfortunate because they need that. They need that healing. They need that support. There isn't focus on the community, which is often the kind of like crux of where the crime comes from, whether it's coming from poverty or a lack of those coping skills or whatever. We have a community that's injured by this crime as well, but only by only focusing on the perpetrator and only focusing on punishment, there really is no room for healing and for rehabilitation, and not just of the perpetrator, but of the wounds, like the healing of the wounds that happened with the victim and the healing of the wounds for the community. And the second thing is like you said in the beginning, that there is hope. I have been to the darkest place in my life. And what I realized is the next day, as bad as it hurt, I was still there. And there were so many times that I didn't know how I was going to go forward. There were so many times that I didn't know what the next day would look like, that I was scared, that I was anxious, that I was just unsure. But what I found is that as long as I keep showing up, as long as I keep putting one foot in front of the other, things get better. All I have to do is stop sabotaging. It's like, where was my bottom? It was when I stopped digging. And so when I talk to people and they're struggling because they have a loved one who's locked up, or because they've been a victim of a crime and they're still struggling to adjust, or they're facing a sentence, I try to tell them, you know what, there is a day that it's going to be okay. And that day, may not be today, and it may not be tomorrow, and it may not be next week. But if we keep going, we're going to get there. And it's really difficult, but it's worth it.
You use a great term, man, self-sabotage. I said it's self-destructive. You said self-sabotage. I think we all struggle with that. I know I personally have struggled with that. Since you've been out of prison and all that, do you find yourself every once in a while still doing that, like self-sabotaging things?
I am incredibly fortunate to have an amazing girlfriend, an amazing partner, because had it been anybody else, I would have blown up this relationship, because the significance of it, the vulnerability I feel, how real and how present it is, has made me profoundly uncomfortable. And in my past, because that's the thing, I've like matured and I've grown up and I've developed these coping mechanisms. I'm really good on my own. But in this new world, and especially in a relationship, I feel like a kid again. Like I feel just completely vulnerable and scared and unsure of what I'm doing. And having someone who is willing to be there with me and hold space as I'm just completely losing my mind and crying and afraid and unsure. She's the reason that I haven't done the self-sabotage that I normally would have done, which is to push people away so that I can, have an excuse to feel sorry for myself. So yeah, the urge has been there, but a combination of the coping tools I learned and also just the really blessing of being around people who are so loving and so capable has allowed me to, has prevented me from going down that path.
How old are you?
I'm 37.
Okay. So one of the words that you used just then, man, I'm going to tell you is the key to you for sure, in my opinion. Vulnerability. I mean, that's what caught my eye automatically when I saw your videos on TikTok. I think you're crazy vulnerable. And my only, not that you need to take my advice, but my only advice to you is to continue that, because it's breathtaking. Very few guys for sure are real vulnerable, but especially everybody struggles with vulnerability, but men seem to struggle, in my opinion, a lot more. And to hear you use that word, and I think that it reminded me of why that first very time I followed you is because I'm like, this is vulnerable. I mean, this guy's putting his stuff out there, man, and there could be repercussions. There really could be, there could be things that whatever, but still you put it out there and you put it out hard. And I think continue, in my opinion, be bold, man. I'm very impressed by it all. So thanks a lot. Thanks for doing the podcast with me. Let's keep in touch. You have my email. I'd love to hear from you and hear anything I could ever do for you. Okay. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you very much.